All right. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Dave Parker. It's July 30th, 2024, and we're in Vancouver, Washington. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today. First question, let's get started with why wine?
Well, I moved from the East Coast where we did not know wine and landed first in California for my first job after college and during grad school, and discovered that I could go up to this magic place called Napa. And back in the day, they would pour free tastes of wine and you'd walk away with a souvenir glass. And that turned into from a casual type of thing to a serious thing. I was working in high tech at the time, working for a high tech company, but kind of went from wouldn't it be nice to own a vineyard to we could make a down payment on a vineyard with the stock options from this high tech company. And so bought my first vineyard in 1987 with my then fiance, now wife, Sandy Parker, and went on from there.
All right, so let's talk about life before that, a little bit leading up to that. Tell me about where you're born and raised and what brought you to the West Coast.
Sure. I was born in Western Massachusetts, a little town called Hamden, and lived there 6 years. We moved down to the Houston, Texas area, ended up living in the house behind Neil Armstrong, and was friends with his son. Lived there for about 8 years, and then moved back to the next town over in Massachusetts, where I went through high school, then school in New Jersey for college, and from there got an opportunity to come out to work for Hewlett-Packard in the Bay Area and go to grad school on their nickel, and it's an offer I couldn't refuse.
So tell me about the interest in Hewlett-Packard. What was your sort of career path at that point?
Yeah, it was electrical engineering, computer science. So I started with a programming job with them, a little bit of electronic design also. After about 3.5 years, just as I was finishing my graduate program, which I did in parallel, a group from that company split off and started another company, and I joined them, and that got really big in a hurry. We went from about 20 people to about 4,000 people in a couple of years. And so typical Silicon Valley story. So I spent a lot of my career there. I mentioned buying the vineyard as part of that. A number of years later, that vineyard, which had Cabernet and Zinfandel on it, was fully planted out, and I started to like Pinot Noir. Got to meet Bert Williams of Williams-Sellium at that time, one of the very premier Pinot Noir producers in California. And I asked him, I said I was interested in a Pinot Noir vineyard, and where would he recommend, thinking he'd recommend the Russian River, which is where his vineyards were, and he said the Eola Hills of Oregon. So went up there, took a look just outside of Amity, found a beautiful piece of land, and bought that. A few months later, it coincidentally got a recruitment call from Tektronix, which was the largest high-tech firm up in Oregon at the time, and ended up taking their job running engineering for them. So my first 4 years up in Oregon were still working in high tech, but developing the vineyard outside of Amity and getting to know the Oregon wine industry.
And what year did you move to Oregon?
December 1994.
Let's talk about the first vineyard in California first. You mentioned wouldn't it be nice to enjoying wines. Tell me about, before buying that vineyard, what was your wine knowledge? What was your wine interest?
Yeah, it was just spending the weekends, in many cases with my fiance or girlfriend, driving around to all the different wine regions in Napa, in Sonoma County, tasting everything and anything. Of course, it was pretty clear once we bought the vineyard that the only varietal that people wanted to pay reasonable money for was Cabernet Sauvignon. And the vineyard we bought had a bunch of very old, decrepit vines that didn't have much value. Varietals called Carignan, Petit Syrah, you've probably heard of. And we had to take most of those out to put in Cabernet to make the vineyard profitable. Signed contracts with Benziger, which was a large producer, and Robert Mondavi, both as buyers. And then for a number of years, also made our own under the Parker Family Vineyards label.
So tell me about going into the wine industry. What was it like having a vineyard? What was it like suddenly having grapes of your own?
Yeah, it was certainly an eye-opening experience. They say that if you have a vineyard, the bills come all year long, and if you're lucky, you get one paycheck a year. So it's a lot of work. It's very hot. There's certainly a romance to it, and a lot of complexity and capability for design and creativity. When you're planting, you make decisions like what's the orientation of your vines, what's spacing, what clones and what varietals you're going to put in, what trellis system. And then every year you're making a lot of decisions in terms of what they call crop thinning, various other decisions you make in the year, water treatment and so forth. So it appeals to an engineer's mind of a lot of complexity, and then it yields that final product that kind of tells you whether you did it right or not. But it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of money for many years before you see decent return.
So tell me about, you mentioned that it had some rehabilitation needs, the first vineyard did. Tell me about making those decisions and putting in what you needed to put in and starting to see kind of the fruits of that effort.
Yeah, well, as I said, the varietals, we tried to farm them for a year and realized the vines were so old they produced a tiny quantity of varietals that nobody wanted to pay any money for. So it was an easy decision that they had to come out. And it was an easy decision, although we made the wrong one in terms of what rootstock to use, because all vines these days are two different. You've got rootstock and budwood. The rootstock protects you from various things, and at that date, Davis was pushing AXR1 as the best rootstock, and of course, right after we planted with it, we found out it wasn't phylloxera resistant, which is the thing that was supposed to be. So still, we got a good 15 years of life out of that vineyard, but it was time to, when we finally sold it in 2005, it was about time to replant because of that poor piece of information that we got from UC Davis. But it was starting with a blank sheet of paper, and I love as an engineer to do that and take a lot of input from a lot of experts and put it all together and look at the specific piece of land that we had, which is right in the heart of, it's right up against Silver Oak's Alexander Valley facility, and a number of other. Sagacio was our other neighbor on the other side, so very well-known people right near us. It was a very nice location.
So then we'll talk about Oregon. You mentioned being told that this was the place to come. So tell me about, did you have any impression of Oregon before that? Had you had Oregon wine? Were you aware of the sort of Oregon wine industry at that point?
Yeah, my sister was up here. She lived in Hood River, so I knew the area. Knew Portland a little bit. Knew a few of the wines back in that day. It was still 80% hobby. You know, people like Domaine Drouin had just come in with some serious winemaking capability and knowledge and some money to invest. But a lot of them, you know, people we still hear about, Erath and Irie and so forth, were still struggling with, you know, what technology makes sense here. We got very lucky. Just as we bought, we had just enough extra global warming that we could, the vineyards would, instead of ripening 1 year every 4, ripen 3 years out of 4, and that all happened just about that same time. In the early 90s, and the wines, in my opinion, that are being made from Oregon, both Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, even some other varietals like Riesling, are absolutely world class. And we deal in a number of those and deal with a lot of people at the high end of the market that seem to agree.
So tell me about finding your Oregon vineyard. You mentioned the Eola-Amity Hills specifically, being told to check there. Tell me about what the neighborhood looked like at the time and finding the piece of land for you.
Yeah, so we did look around everywhere from Salem up to the outskirts of Portland. Ended up finding the right property just a couple miles east of the little town of Amity on Amity Road. It had just been cleared. There was a little startup winery right next to us called Antica Terra. Nobody had ever heard of, and the other property above us, and whom we had bought this piece, worked with CalPERS to develop a dramatically large piece, which has since been bought by Domaine Drouin as their property in that area. So it was, we thought, a wonderful piece of land in that it was mostly southern facing, straight shot through the Van Duzer corridor for the sea influence and the cooler air, but a warm, sort of a warm microclimate. And it was unique in that it had probably the only volcanic plug on a commercial vineyard in the country that I know of, a little round knob on the hill, which you can still see that was all lava that had pushed up, thousands of years ago. But I knew it was the right property when I reached down and picked up some of the soil, and it was a mixture of white calcium rich soil and red volcanic soil, which is exactly the way the best Pinot Noir vineyards in the world around Romanée-Conti, La Tâche, it's almost exactly the same soil mixture. So I said, this has got to be the right location. But it was all had just been timbered, so we still had to get the roots out and get those burned and prep the soil. It was starting with a raw piece of land. And we developed that for a number of years and had went from one child to four and decided that 2 vineyards plus 4 other wine businesses plus 4 children was a little too much. So we sold both those vineyards in 2004 and 2005. Sagacious bought the California vineyard. The one in Oregon is now Duke's family, who you might be familiar with. So they're still going strong.
Tell me about, you mentioned it was raw and you're starting from scratch and starting from having to rehabilitate the lands. Tell me about the process of putting a vineyard in that way.
Yeah, entirely different from our one in California. Our California one had been a vineyard before. There was already water supply there. There was a well and pumps and all the basic drip lines. And what you needed to do, though, since phylloxera was there, was deep rip and fumigate. And at the same time, deep ripping is you've got these giant blades that maybe 4 feet long like knives, and they're dragged behind a very heavy tractor. Same time, you tend to put in more lime with soil amendment, and that's the main expense. And putting back your drip system, and that's your major expense for a California vineyard because water is short. As I say, you have to get rid of the phylloxera, and you have to add lime to neutralize the soil. So that was the main work in the California vineyard. We thought we knew it all when we moved to Oregon, and realized we knew nothing, because up there was no need for fumigation or deep ripping because there had never been any vineyard there before. There was no phylloxera in the soil. It was all the soil bordered on being too wet, not too dry. So the big thing was to make sure you left the ground cover in between the rows to soak up the excess moisture until the soil was dry enough to drive tractors on. If you had to put water on the vines at all, it was once a year, maybe a gallon a vine for the first 2 years, and then it was all fine. On the other hand, what we discovered we had to do was put 9-foot-high electrified deer fence all the way around the property, because it was the deer that would destroy all the vines. And so that was about 2 miles worth of fence. Imagine 9 feet high, electrify the whole thing. And so, again, entirely different challenges, including even just keeping the roadway into the vineyard dry enough to get equipment on. So you're working with very, very dry on one side and very, very wet on the other in the 2 different extremes. And in California, you're worried about the grapevines getting too high a level of sugar before they're physiologically ripe, before the stems and the seeds are brown, and having to harvest sort of overripe grapes. In Oregon, you're biting your fingernails right into October. That you're going to get the grapes off before the rains come and have them ruined or really damaged by that. So it's in ways a lot of the same things. It's soil and weather, and having to handle those things, and those are, of course, you only have limited control over, and a lot of guesswork and major penalties for guessing wrong. So that's the life of a vineyard owner.
Tell me about, you mentioned obviously Pinot Noir being something you were excited about and the reason you were here. So tell me about deciding what to plant, how to plant, and finding, I guess, where did you find your source material?
Yeah, the source material actually came up out of California. There was really one major producer back then, Sonoma Grapevines, and Rich Schmidt, I believe. But we decided on the most up to date clones in those days, and that was 113, 114, 115. In the days before that, there were sort of hobbyist clones like Vadensville, I think have been pretty much taken out, but those are the first three that I think really caught on. Now, of course, we're all the way up into 667, 777, and beyond. But the decisions to put those in, were a major investment in Pinot Noir, and that was the reason we bought the vineyard. But it was a very large piece of land. We probably had 55 or 60 plantable acres on the 115-acre piece of property, and so we looked at the specifics of the land and said this is almost identical in terms of what they call degree days, which is ripening capability, as the Côte Rôtie, the northernmost part of the Rhone, where some extremely valuable and fantastic wines are made from Syrah. And so we said, let's put in some Syrah on the warmest possible strip, which is where we didn't want to put the Pinot Noir. And that ripened very well. So we're one of the crazy people to do Syrah. And then the white varietal in the Rhone that goes with it is Viognier. And that was sort of in the days of ABC, anything but Chardonnay. And of course, you had to put some Pinot Gris in at the time for your white cash flow, but we said we'll also put some Viognier in to potentially mix with the Syrah, as they do in Côte Rôtie, to simulate the so-called Guigal. La Landau, La Turc have both Syrah and a little bit of Viognier in them. So we were experimented. We put a little Nebbiolo in, we put a little Tempranillo in, just a row each to see how the vines would do. But of course, the vineyard, what really makes it, and even to this day, is the Pinot Noir. But it was in the days when people were still experimenting, and since those days, Chardonnay has become king up here, and a lot of the Dijon clones do extremely well. And I think now Oregon is, we've called it the New Burgundy for a long time, but Oregon really is the best place, maybe in the New World, for both Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, in my opinion.
Once your grapes were online and starting to produce, was there ever a thought to make wine, or were you always going to sell grapes?
Both of the properties were set up to sell grapes. They did not have wineries on them, although they had houses, small old houses on them, so we could stay there or put our vineyard manager there. But there were enough large professional facilities with excess capacity that even when we made wine under our own name, we made it at a different facility. And the advantages of that are that it comes with its own winemaker. They've already bought all the equipment. They have the expertise of something to tell if something's not going right or something needs adjusting. The winemaker that we picked for our Oregon vineyard was someone that's quite well known, Jay Summers, who was a winemaker for Jay Christopher. And it turned out he was making his wine at, Bill Holleran now has a vineyard up there, but his property was actually right next to ours in West Lynn. His house had a barn behind it that he used for his winery. It was walking distance from where we lived, and our sons played together, but we would just had our grapes delivered there, and we could walk over and visit them as they were being turned into wine. And Jay later partnered with Ernie Lowson of Dr. Lowson fame from Germany. 2 bottles of wine that are right out there are his. They're going to New York with me next week so that Charles Curtis of Decanter Magazine can taste them. So the wheels within wheels all came together, and all of those people became major players in the Oregon wine industry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So besides the wines that you made, who else did you sell grapes to?
I mentioned out of our California vineyard, Benziger and Mondavi, and I got to meet Robert Mondavi at his 85th birthday party, and get tied into that industry. The Benzigers were very influential in creating the fighting varietals, and we only made the wine the first year off of our Oregon vineyard before we sold it. Also, so it was just long enough to prove the property, get it developed for somebody that wanted to put more time and effort into it. And they, in fact, the Dukes put a full winery on there and are making it locally. But in the day, it was much more common to either be a commercial grower or a winemaker. You tended to be compounding your risk too much to do both, and both California and Oregon have farm credit bureaus that would encourage you to either do one or the other, not do both. Nowadays, of course, it's the other way around.
So you mentioned that while this was all happening, you had other wine businesses as well. So tell us about the development of the other part of your wine businesses.
Yeah, so I mentioned I was in high tech, and I mentioned I came up here to Tektronix to head up engineering. And I knew the division that I was working for had been on and off the market a couple times. It was outside of Tektronix's core business of test and measurement. It was more computers and computer animation and storage. And so as part of my job hiring, I had the opportunity that if the job ever went away to have a year's severance, and that turned out to happen, and the stock that I had been given over time was all vested. So I pretty much had an opportunity to do what I wanted for a year or two. And I had a building on my property in West Lynn that I always thought was perfect for a wine business. It had underground storage at perfect temperature. It had an upper area that could be turned into a good open office environment similar to this one. And it was 50 yards from my house, and we had young children at the time, and so I could be close to them. So my wife's best friend had left a high tech, and she went to start her own consulting company doing something no one had ever heard of before, which is called website design. And when she heard I was looking at something, she said, well, there's a little company that paid another company to write some software to actually put an auction package on the internet. And that little company you've never heard of is called eBay. And the software is owned by the developers, and they'll sell you a license for $5,000. I know that's a lot of money. And you'd be my first client. I'll write you the whole website for another $5,000. That's half my normal rate. I know that's a lot of money. But for that $10,000, we created and started the first online rare wine internet auction house. That was called Brentwood Wine Company. We were on Brentwood Drive. At the time, O.J. Simpson was in the news, and everyone knew he lived in a very ritzy neighborhood called Brentwood. So it seemed like the right name, and we still operate that as the longest standing continuous rare wine auction house in the world. In fact, all that work it's done right here. Along the way, we found that because of licensing in Oregon, we had to buy the product before we could auction it, which was pretty risky. So we had to be very knowledgeable on rare wine valuation. Found a little tiny publication that a gentleman was writing in Alaska, collecting all auction trade information and consolidating that, called the Wine Market Journal. We asked, instead of getting the little broadside, the little booklet to look up all the values, whether he kept that information on a spreadsheet like Lotus 123. And he goes, well, I keep it on this brand new package called Excel, and the advantage is I can email it to you. And so we had a deal to get that data, and that became the heart and soul of our appraisal work. And we hired a gentleman by the name of Peter Gibson, who you've talked to, who had both technology background and wine background. And he wrote a lot of software that would help us appraise wine automatically using this data set. And that became a core of the business. A few years later, got a call from the guy that was publishing that, saying he had moved to California, was working for this little company that was trying to do rare wine as a retail business, and they weren't going to make it. And would I be interested in buying the Wine Market Journal, which he still owned, and hiring him? And it was perfect for us because California had the right laws that let you both be a distributor and a retailer and an importer, which you couldn't do in any other state. And that's really what we needed to grow the business. So we founded Benchmark Wine Group, utilizing him as an initial general manager, and really became the first large rare wine retailer in the U.S. We kind of traded using a model that Europe had started. There's several rare wine retailers there that are quite big, and so we utilized that along with our appraisal software, which let us buy private wine collections, let us look at wine lists that brokers might have or distributors might have, identify the ones that were at a price that we thought we could in turn sell at a profit, and sort of scaled that whole business up in parallel. And that business fairly quickly outgrew the auction business, very much like people would rather buy on Amazon than eBay. Plenty of people buy on eBay, but Amazon, most people just want to know what it's going to cost and buy it and know it's going to get there and in good condition. And so that was our model. And so we've kind of become the largest rare wine retailer in the United States, Benchmark, based in Napa, California. And then during the pandemic, we looked at expanding into Washington, D.C., which is the other place that has licensing that would allow us to operate. So Benchmark Wine, and then also let us deal in rare spirits. So Benchmark Wine and Spirits has been operating now for a little bit over 2 years. We also run that out of this office. Really cover both coasts and nationally. We have employees now in Florida. We have a high-tech consultant in Texas. So we have people in Oregon, here in Washington, as well as California, and consultants all over the country. So we're pretty much a nationwide company in that space. Along the way, I was asked, we're members of the National Association of Wine Retailers that work hard to allow wine to be shipped across state lines, which legally they have to be allowed to be, but states put in place laws nonetheless to restrict that. Sat on their board for a number of years, and then was asked to be head of their board and president of that organization. So I do that in my spare time. And that's my story.
Wow. I have so many questions about that. So from the initial idea of the auction side of that, tell me about how do you get started in something like that? How do you start finding both inventory and buyers? How do you find a market for that?
Well, it kind of built up, it is a stepwise process where you have to find enough people to buy the wine that you've committed to take, and then you have to find enough wine to make the people that are your customers continually happy. We initially were advertising in magazines like Wine Enthusiast and Wine Spectator. There really wasn't much in the way of an online advertising market when we got going in 1998. And that was the way we found a lot of our initial customers. I was a significant wine collector, had a couple thousand bottle collection, also had channels to get wine for good prices from people like Mondavi, so that included Opus One and some of their other highly regarded wines. So kind of used that product along with the advertisements that we placed in magazines to sort of get the initial business going, and then the website presence. And there really wasn't much. There was no Google back then. There was not much in the way of search engine optimization. Over time there was, but we did some digital advertising when there were some reasonable ways to do that, to drive people to the site. But at the time, there were very few people doing what we were doing, so we got well known. In many cases around the world, I received calls from Japan saying, "Hey, we're great fans, and we buy from you," and so forth. So, it was a small business. It was a specialty business, but we were happily surprised to see how many people were very serious collectors and were interested in getting perfectly aged bottles of wine, which was either the only way to get those in the past was to age them yourself, buy them young, and put them away.
So you mentioned kind of the software component to this in terms of valuation, but I'm curious about actually locating. How did you locate the bottles? How did you find people who had bottles and were willing to sell them?
Yeah, so in the same advertising where we're advertising that we have this available, we also advertise, we buy wine cellars. And we actually stumbled into that because we were buying from brokers here in Portland, for instance. At the time, there was one or two distributors that had back vintages of old wine. We would buy from commercial sources. I mentioned, right from the winery, from the Mondavis. But we had more and more of our clients say, "I've got more wine than I can drink. I'd like to sell some. Will you buy it from me?" And it was we couldn't really do it because we had to go through the 3-tier system. Couldn't buy wine directly in Oregon, although we finally found a distributor that would move those things through for a small amount of money. But in California, it was one of the motivations for opening the California operation, because with that distributor license, we could buy right from private parties. Once that happened, it kind of opened the floodgates of product. And the fact that we owned the Wine Market Journal and were communicating with all the people that were looking at auction history and looking potentially to buy at auction or sell at auction, we also could advertise, here's an alternative to auction. We're happy to auction it for you using Brentwood. You've got a lot of other options there too. But unlike anyone else, we can tell you on average what you would likely get if you took it to auction and pay you immediately that amount of money. And that was very compelling for people that didn't want to take a risk, didn't want to wait several months for their payments. And so we sort of created our own niche that way. And we're still very well known, and we usually have a seat at the table with every major collection that comes to market where they'll ask for an appraisal from us. In fact, right now we've got we've got a wine collection being auctioned at Brentwood right this minute that comes from a very well-known collector that everybody in the country would know their name. Unfortunately, I can't tell you who it is because we're under non-disclosure, but you would know exactly the person. And likewise, we just put in an offer on a cellar that's owned by a very, very, very prominent political figure. Again, can't tell you who it is, but we get those types of very famous people bringing collections to us all the time, just because we're well known, and those people that they may be consulting with tend to also know us. All the wine consultants, the brokers, know about us. Our president in Napa is a master sommelier, and that ties him into the entire sommelier network. And a lot of the sommeliers that you might meet at restaurants in their spare time during the days and so forth consult to wine cellar owners. So that's a great way to get the word out that we're buyers, as well as we're people that can help fill those parts of a cellar that somebody wants to fill.
Tell me about, in the early days, tell me about finding, what were people most excited about? What were the wines or the regions, or what did you find was the most kind of the biggest bang for your buck, or the things that people got most excited about?
Yeah, in the early days, the really serious wine collectors, especially on the West Coast, which was our initial market, were either buying the very high-end California Napa Cabernets, Opus One and so forth, or they were buying Bordeaux, which of course is Cabernet based. So that was by far the largest part of the market. Over the years, Burgundy which is a Pinot Noir, has gone crazy, which has helped bring top Oregon Pinots up in the market. Champagnes now are very, very highly collected. Wines from the Rhone, wines from Italy, the so-called Super Tuscans, and the ones in the Piemonte are all very, very highly regarded. And a number of other regions. And a lot of that was driven by Robert Parker. When he would find a new region and start giving it very, very high scores, the collectors would turn around for a while. Australia was very much in the spotlight. That's faded a little bit. But now we deal in wines from all over the world. I mean, Oregon's got a prominent place. Oregon's getting very well known for extremely good, especially Pinot Noir, and to a lesser degree, Chardonnay. And we're fortunately having had a vineyard here, got to know a lot of the major players, and so we do a good business in that, and do some direct distribution for some of those people also.
Yeah, so tell me about that. Tell me about getting to know the Oregon wine industry from both the vineyard side and from the wine auction side, and who have been sort of the prominent players in that part of it for you.
Yeah. Well, I think early on we already had, at about the same time the Oregon vineyard I had was coming into production. We had Brentwood going, the auction house. So I got to know a lot of the players, sort of this overlap of, I have a vineyard and I have this auction site and they're looking for rare wine. So for instance, we were the largest customer for Beaufrere, which is Mike Edsel and Robert Parker initially. Doug Tennell and Brickhouse, when he was really getting the biodynamic movement moving in Oregon, was one of my personal favorites. Worked with Ernie Lowson and Jay Christopher. In fact, just met with them last week, and that Kirk Willey, who's a partner of Peter Liam, who's a friend of Peter Gibson. Kirk and Peter Liam wrote the first product region-specific wine review magazine ever, the Riesling Report on German wines, which is how Kirk ended up running Lowson USA, and Peter ended up taking his Riesling knowledge and writing some of the definitive books on Champagne and Madeira and other areas of the world. And all of that began here. Other prominent players that we work with 00 Wines, Chris and Catherine Herman. He used to come to our little barn in the woods that we ran Brentwood from, as did Ernie Lowson, and a lot of the high-end wine people all knew about us and came and picked up the wines they'd won and hung out and drank wine and watched the deer, in the woods in the Oregon sort of setting. But it was just an honor to watch, Dickie Rath, and watch these people grow the reputation of the industry. Larry Stone and Lingua Franca, just was talking to him. So a lot of I mentioned Antica Terra. They were just basically our next door neighbor, and we compare soil types and that type of thing. But the market has really matured here in Oregon, and I think it's a great complement to the hard work and the professionalism, but also what's really special about the region, the microclimates and the soils, and the passion of the people.
Mm-hmm. So you talked a little bit about the growth in terms of sort of regional interest for people collecting. Tell me about how collectors have changed, or if you've seen them change. How have your customers changed since you started the business?
Yeah, well, they've gotten younger, or people the same age have taken over for people that have gotten older, depending on your point of view. The baby boomers and the generation before the baby boomers, the so-called greatest generation, were the major buyers when we first got going back in 1998. And, they were very much influenced by the French Paradox 60 Minutes episode, pointing out that wine, especially red wine, seems to, reduce your chance of heart disease and prolong your life, not to mention making you, happy and being a great social beverage. And the collecting, I think, was driven a lot by Robert Parker and his scoring, and the fact that that caused a lot of the wineries to have more wine, or have not enough wine to sell, so they started to sell it directly to consumers. It was a major Supreme Court ruling that let them ship nationwide. It was just really a confirmation of the Interstate Commerce Clause in the Constitution, but it was very important so that these top-end wineries were able to sell all of their wine to a limited mailing list, and in many cases it took years of waiting to get on the list, which made people want the wine even more. So the collector got to be the type of person that had access to things that other people didn't have, and maybe had been getting them every year, and we're getting them more and more aged. That same group of people then started to pay attention to Bordeaux, which the Europeans had been collecting for generations, and then the other varietals and regions sort of in step with Robert Parker's describing them, and so they've sort of followed that. Along the way, the Gen Xers, the generation after the baby boomers, sort of followed in the baby boomers' footsteps and followed the reviewers and so forth. That's starting to change now. The greatest generation, the generation older than the boomers, are starting to pass, and they're not drinking very much, if at all, and their cellars are certainly on the market a lot. The baby boomers are, the average age of a baby boomer now is over 65, and fortunately they're mostly still in good health because they've been drinking wine. I shouldn't say that, but to a large degree they're right in a mixed place of buying and selling. There's some thought that they want to sell more than they buy, but somebody pointed out that's from that generation that I'm not going to live long enough to age bottles for 25 or 30 years anymore. So now I want to buy the ones that are perfectly aged right now, and so that still helps our segment in the market. The millennials and the older Gen Zers that have come to age are sort of following a different path. Their catchwords, they're very interested in wine. They're experimenting. There are plenty of other alternatives now, from fancy mixed drinks and cannabis to things that flavored, fortified waters, White Claw types of things. But the serious ones tend to discover wine. And in my opinion, once you've discovered wine and gotten interested in it, you don't tend to go back, which has always been a strength in the industry, because it's not a beverage for over-consuming alcohol. It's a beverage for sociability, and it's the type of thing that goes well with a meal, which goes well with people. And unlike beer and spirits that tend to be more event-oriented and maybe consumed a little bit in excess. So we're seeing a growth of so-called natural wines, which are low sulfite, which is good, but can be also low intervention, and a lot of the winemaking techniques that we've learned are very important, like controlling the fermentation temperature and making sure you've stabilized the wine before you bottled it and stuff like that are often skipped in the process. So you have this wide range of unusual flavors and stable or non-stable bottles that'll blow up on the shop racks. They're inexpensive to make. They are, if made properly, relatively wholesome. On the other hand, they have unusual flavors, and the same with this trend of orange wines, which are essentially white wines where you leave the skins on for a long time and get unusual flavors that way. So I don't think that's a bad problem, just like I didn't think it was bad when so-called $2 Chuck came out, because it got people interested in wine, got them to move away from alternatives that maybe weren't as healthful for you or weren't as associated with moderation and sociability. And so I think we're going to see the very best of the wines that are made in a natural style. Biodynamic methods are a supernatural way, which incredibly high quality wines come from. Doug Tennell was really, as I mentioned before, was really the person that drove that here in Oregon. All of those, some of them will have the ability to be collected and will become more and more valued as people recognize how consistently high quality they are and how well they age. And others will just be a passing trend that may bring people into wine, and that serves a purpose for the industry also.
Talk about the growth of the company on the kind of the personnel side. Who have you had to add? What have you had to add to the company in terms of expertise or knowledge or ability as the company has grown?
Yeah. Well, the gentleman you met walking in, Matt, is my longest-serving employee. Peter Gibson, who you've interviewed, has been working for me as a consultant for even longer. So we had to start with data management. We had to start with one person. When we had auction software, the software sold the wine for us, but we needed someone to manage that and manage customer service. Once we moved into retail, we needed a lot more customer service. One of the biggest issues is how do you ship people's wine to them safely, because it is a product that can be easily damaged by heat, especially it can freeze too, but that's harder. And so we needed a large customer service team as well as a data team early on. Mm-hmm. And in fact, my verbal shorthand for what we do is we're a data and customer service company that happens to deal in rare wine. So in my opinion, no business these days can be successful if it doesn't have good customer service and good data management, good data. So we have large, this operation right here is primarily a data consolidation and management company. This is a separate company. This is First Growth Technologies. Although I mentioned one of the services we provide is managing our other small operations, our DC operation and the auctions. Then our larger company down in Napa is virtually all retail, but then they also handle a lot of the wines that come through for the other operations. And that company, besides having a large data division of its own, mainly to manage its own data specific to what they do, retail, has an on-staff sales team. So full service for the higher end people that want that. That large customer service group I mentioned. Of course, most of our accounting gets done down there, but some of it gets done here in this office. And then we just have consultants all over the country that are helping us find product. There's one other team, which is a team that does all our acquisitions and purchasing, everything from the collections that we buy, which is about 70% of the product that we have is very high-end, perfect condition wine cellars, and about 30% coming from European sources, brokers, and so forth, and domestic sources, wineries within the U.S., and distributors and importers. So that's our team. We have on the order of 45 people in California. We're in the process of buying another company that'll bring in about 10 more, 14 more. And then up here we have about 4 or 5, and then some consultants, and then about the same number in Washington, D.C. And then a few people are working completely remote, such as our sales marketing manager who works out of Florida.
So given all of the data and given all of the sort of the technology part of this, how much, I guess, a human component is there still in determining which wines you're going to engage with?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, with the Wine Market Journal, the publication that collects all of the auction history from all auction houses in the world, every online, every live, that gives us a good visibility in terms of what people consider collectible wines. Mm-hmm. And then that we use that information again in making purchase decisions from collections, and it's a lot of data matching now. It's exactly what Mr. Gibson helps us do, where we can take an Excel spreadsheet and it with the wines named in any reasonable way a human would possibly name them, and with a piece of software have 95 to 97% of the work done, identifying the collectible wines that are part of that list and valuing them. Mm-hmm. Human being goes back and looks to fill in the blanks, does some sanity checking on the numbers, looks at how balanced the collection is, which is important to us. So we essentially have a concept of large amounts of software driven by very good data doing the heavy lifting in all aspects of our business, and then human beings overseeing that, not the other way around. But we have a very large piece of software that we've been building for 15 years plus that drives the entire Napa operation from front end. We have a wine collection that we've agreed to buy, all the way to inventory control, pricing it, listing it online, making it available to our salespeople for them to place orders also, holding it for the people that have bought it when they're ready to have it pulled, shipped, tracked, and then doing analysis on what's selling fast, what's not selling so well, and how should we adjust prices. We have access to data feed on the current retail price of just about every wine in the world. So as we we know pretty much what somebody could get at auction for any wine. That's about the price we pay. We know what people are pricing it for in the market. We know that's the price we can sell at. We carefully track the difference, because there better be enough difference in there to cover our operation and maybe a little bit of profit. And that's the way we run our business. So it's sort of the way an engineer would put it together. My wife is in marketing and sales, so I get a little bit of feedback from her on the marketing and sales side. Certainly can appreciate the customer service aspect of it. They interface with customers a lot. But that's essentially our business.
So tell me about if you come into contact with a large collection and you run the numbers on it and you find there are wines in there you're excited about, but maybe not all of them, or maybe the bulk you're not. Do you only buy whole collections? Are there other ways you approach something like that?
Yeah, we'll do both, because there are some people, for instance, people that are selling a house, or people that maybe have inherited a wine collection that just need what we would call a full clean out. They need every bottle gone. They have no interest in keeping anything, okay? All the way up to the people that just want to sell the bottles that will get them a significant amount of money, and they may not even know what those are. So our appraisal process, when we find a seller that is exactly as you've described, a lot of them are very collectible, a lot of them may have no or very little value in the market, will have a conversation with the owner along those lines that, your collection taken as a whole is worth this, but N% of your bottles represent almost all the value. If you keep this number of bottles, you'll still get 95% of that big number, or maybe the entire big number. We'll still take it all if you have to get it all out of there, but recognize that some of these bottles may not have any value. Mm-hmm. And then likewise, when we get the bottles in, we carefully inspect them. And if most of them aren't in extremely good condition, we may reject the whole cellar. But that's 1 or 2% of the cellars that we get where we have to do that. On the other hand, some cellars will have some bottles that are either lower in value because they have torn labels, or there's some signs that the cork has moved a little bit, or slightly low fills, various things that will take value down. And we'll tell people that if the bottles are in too bad a shape, then we'll reject the bottles and say, okay, well, we got your collection, most everything looks good, but these 10 bottles don't have any real market value, or these 30 bottles all are, reduced in value due to their conditions. And so we'll negotiate with them until they understand. We'll give them the option of taking those bottles back. And we have people all over the range in terms of, I just want it gone. Because we'll say, these bottles are worth nothing, but we'll dispose of them for you if you want. And a lot of people say, fine, I have no place for them, take them. Or some people say, I want them back. We'll charge them to ship them back to them. And the same thing when we give mixed offers to people, where some people say, I just want the whole thing gone. Some people say, I'll keep these. You just take those. And then we have various methods. We can do everything from send a team on site and pack the wine up, inspecting it while we're there in their cellar, and wire them funds as the truck is pulling away, all the way to people where they don't even know what they have. We say, send it to our warehouse in Napa. We'll inventory it for you. We'll appraise it for you. And then if you tell us what you want to keep, and of course, we'll charge you to ship the ones back you want shipped back. And we will sell on consignment also. If they think the value of their wine's a little higher, especially if it's a lot of rare things and it's a large collection, we'll say, well, you may be right. You may understand this market better than we do. We don't really think they do, but we'll say that to be nice. We'll say, well, we can try to get you a little bit more. And that means pricing ourselves a little bit high in the market. It'll take longer to sell and so forth, and it will pay you as it sells. Mm-hmm. And some people like that, some of the very biggest collectors in the country, if they're going to send a 7-figure seller to us, getting a few extra percent's a significant amount of money. Mm-hmm. And so we'll do that also. But the vast majority is people just say, I like your number, let me send you the wine. We'll find a few bottles sometimes that are in sub-excellent condition. Might be a small adjustment or not. And then we send them payment, and they're delighted, and they tell their friends, and that's how we've developed a reputation in the industry. And if they send too many bottles, we'll tell them that. A lot of our competitors are not quite as forthright, where if they find a few extra bottles, they may not get credit. But we find we make an awful lot of friends to say, hey, did you know this bottle is identified differently than you thought, and it's worth more? We're paying you extra for it. Or you sent 4 bottles of this instead of 3. Do you want to sell all 4? It's worth this much more money.
It's fascinating. And I assume the ones you dispose of are like office Christmas party wines at that point?
We do all kinds of things with those. I mean, it's illegal in California to dump it down the drain because it contains alcohol. You can't go dump it in your backyard or any of those things. So really bad shaped bottles, there's an alcohol distillery that they'll just take it all for free, and we'll build up a pallet over time and send it over every few months. Bottles that are in questionable enough condition that we would never want to sell them. I mean, our thought process is if 10% of the bottles we sell people find are undrinkable, that's damaging our business. If 4% are not, we want every single bottle to be perfect. So if it's in that range where, hey, it could be good, could be bad, we won't sell it, but we'll put it away for what we call teaching wines or event wines. So when we're in a situation where good wine is called for, but we'll be there to open the bottles and taste it, and if it's not good, it kind of quietly goes away. That's what those bottles get used for, or teaching, or events. And that's the same thing that happens with those bottles that have they're in fine shape, but they have no collector value. And then if we're asked to go to sort of casual events and bring some wine, that's a good place to go to get that. So it's all across the board. And the bottom line is, what's going to get us the most happy customers and the most recognition. That's the best use of a bottle of wine.
So can you give us an example of an incredibly valuable or incredibly exciting or incredibly unreal bottle of wine that you've come across?
Oh, lots of them. So the oldest bottle of drinkable wine in the world we sold, I should have brought it for you, it's sitting on my bookcase at home, 1727 Bremer Town Hall Apostle wine. So we sold that. There was actually a significant amount of it found in an old barrel behind the wall of the town hall in Bremer and found to be good and bottled back in 1955. There was a German count lived up in Washington State that got one of those bottles and sold us his collection, so we had that come through. I did a talk at Aspen Food and Wine on finding the next unicorn. A unicorn bottle is one you've heard rumors of but never seen. There are a lot of those. We've probably traded in almost all of them, but a couple that come to mind, one of my board members who used to head up Petco, as a matter of fact, one of the biggest collectors in the country, I tried to give them each a gift, each of my board members a gift each year, and I asked him what he wanted. And Diamond Creek was the first producer to do vineyard-specific wines, Cabernets. And they've got one vineyard called their Lake Vineyard that's a tiny piece of land, an acre, maybe less than an acre, that they only produce wine from the Lake Vineyard in the very best years. And those bottles is only, the very first year was 1978. They only did about 140 bottles. And my board member wanted one of those. He says, I've been looking for one for 10 years because I have the other three from 1978, the other three vineyards, but I want that one to do as part of a tasting. And so we searched for about a year and a half for one. There's probably maybe 15, 20 of those bottles left in the world in good shape, and we found one. And so I was very happy to be able to give that to him. There's a very famous vineyard, the Eola-Amity Vineyard, and Ridge, a very famous producer, only made wine from that vineyard 1 year, in 1971. And it's always been a legendary bottle nobody's ever seen. And at one point finally found one, and we were doing, a group of collectors was doing a definitive 4-day, all the Eola-Amity wines, every wine ever made from Eola-Amity. From Arajo, which is now owned by Chateau Latour on. And so we contributed that as part of this, and it was one of the most phenomenal wines I'd ever tasted, one of the 3 or 4 in my life that brought tears to my eyes in terms of how good it was. Taking a trip through Sherry, Jerez is like correctly pronounce it, and got to go to one of the producers at the family. It's part of our PR firm, owns it, and they had a barrel from 1728 with sherry still in it, only about this high. I got to taste that. That also brought tears to my eyes in terms of how phenomenal it was. Still have somewhere around here a few drops in a little plastic bottle up there on my bookcase left over that was in that glass, and I couldn't bear to throw away. So it's sitting up there. So 1727 and 1728. I could go on and on. 1945 Romani Conti, tiny production, absolutely legendary. Was a student of Professor Bipin Desai, who's a physics professor at UC Riverside, but is also the dean of rare wine in terms of putting together incredibly great definitive wine tastings. And one of his 3-day weekends was all the wines of Romani Conti, including this 45, which is just legendary and not seen. Got to taste that. So, and we've traded virtually every great wine in the world many times over. So they all come through.
You mentioned obviously competitors. You have competitors now. You were ahead of the game technologically. How has it evolved? How has this wine market evolved, and what does it look like now compared to when you started?
Yeah. So I think there's two different directions to go on that question. The first is taking wine online, and we were very at the very beginning, back in the days when people were afraid to put their credit card out on the internet, and early questions about how you legally ship wine and so forth. I was good friends with the founder of eVineyard that eventually became Wine.com, which was based here in Portland. And so a lot of notes got compared there. And that industry has obviously taken off dramatically, and I help bring more people into it through the presidency of the National Association of Wine Retailers, because the mom and pop wine shops just can't compete anymore with the grocery stores and Total Wine and More and so forth. So they have to develop a specialty, and they need to develop a national audience, and online is the way to do that. So we actually help create the competition in that regard. The other aspect of what we do, which is rare wine, back vintage wine, very hard to find wine, is there are very few players that use our retail model, because there are few people that have the data that we have and the long history of how to use it. There are some, and we're actually partners with a couple of them. And I think partnering is always, in that space, is always better than competition, because even if we have the same customers and similar methods, we don't have the same bottles at any given time. So collectively, we're making these collectors happy. And we want to make sure that the people that are not so ethical are kind of pushed to the side, and we kind of police our industry. But the other competitors in the rare wine space are the auction houses, which we're partners with also, because we're collecting information for them and then giving them access to that information. We are the same software that lets us appraise a wine collection, lets us bid the book at auction houses, where we can put a bid in on virtually every high quality, good condition lot at an auction. They tend to be low bids, so we won't tend to win too much, but what we win at good prices. But then that supports the auction house, because they're looking, of course, to find bidders on every single lot they have in the auction. So we're both partners and competitors with them in that regard, both to get sellers as well as to find buyers for product. But we fill different needs, because they're liquidators. They've got wine out there that they just want to find a buyer among a small pool that wants to take it right now, so they'll tend to get less money. whereas we take it into a retail model where, okay, we've got it available for you when you're looking for something. And that tends to be more service-oriented and drive a higher price. Plus, we stand behind every bottle, and whereas they're more or less caveat emptor.
You mentioned, obviously, you've added businesses along the way. You're in the process of adding one now. Tell me a little bit about the future for yourself and for the wine umbrella.
Well, the future for myself, I wish I knew what that was, but I certainly have a very good management team that can run the companies. So, maybe there's a future for me taking a small step back, but I love what I'm doing right now. And energy, still very energetic and healthy. So as long as that lasts, I'll keep doing what I'm doing. We watch very closely the cycles in the wine business, and it is a very cyclical business. The dot-com bomb took things down, as did September 11th. But in between, there have been phenomenal rises. There's a neo-prohibition movement right now. We'll see what that ends up doing, and we'll see what happens if tariffs go back into place. Those would all be potentially downward pressure. There's a demographic shift in terms of what people are looking for and consuming. So it's always a cyclical business. It takes 7 years plus to put a vineyard in place, and almost that long to change the varietals that you're producing. So it's always something that's coming into fashion and something that's going out of fashion. We've seen those cycles enough now over the 25 years we've been operating, 26, that we view it in terms of, okay, what part of the cycle are we in right now? Mm-hmm. It's not like we're going to panic or one's better than the other, because none of them, when things are really super hot, you can't get the wine you want. When things are cold, you've got plenty of wine, but less buyers. We think we're coming back into a balance right now, but there are a lot of people in the industry that are, for various reasons, having to get out or wanting to get out. There are a lot of baby boomers and older baby boomers that are just retiring out of the industry. There are a lot of people that haven't figured out how to make it all work well. So there's a significant amount of people, as there have always been, that are potentially moving out of the business, and there's a substantial amount of sort of integration and consolidation, and we think this is one of those times.
Last question for you. Greatest achievement or proudest accomplishment?
I would say the number of people that we can give good paying jobs to. Wine industry is not known for being able to do that very well, because we're such an information heavy company and one that deals at the upper part of the market and to some degree weathers the economic cycles better. But we're able to employ a lot of people at salaries and with remuneration packages that are toward the high end of the market. I would say our ability to have done that over the last 25 years is maybe what makes me the proudest. I mean, I've been able to support a family, not as well as a high-tech career would, doing this, and been able to meet a lot of great people and an awful lot of the icons in the industry I count as friends or certainly acquaintances. Gotten go all over the world and lots of travel. Do things I love to do. And they say if you're doing what you love, you're going to do a good job at it. So all of those make me proud. Getting to speak. I just did a tour speaking at Stanford and Harvard and MIT and Wharton and Columbia Law and so forth. Got to meet a lot of very exciting, very smart people, love wine. So all of those are nice benefits of the business. But at the end of the day, it's the people that you can help. It's the families, therefore, you can help. And it goes even beyond the customers, because we are helping people that maybe have financial needs, that have wine cellars. We help people, vendors, stay in business. We help people, for instance, through the National Association of Wine Retailers, start or get their startup companies up to a successful level. So those are all benefits also.
All right, excellent. All the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything we didn't cover that you wanted to cover today?
Boy, we've sure covered a lot. This is it's a great project you're doing, and the people, as I'm sure you found in the wine business, are very passionate about it, and they're a very special group of people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and thank you for taking the time to meet with us today, share your story with us, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Okay.
Thank you.